a year ago, I was approached by a man called Cody Snodgres, who said that he was a former independent contractor working for the CIA, under the CIA for many, many years, and that he in 1994 was offered to bomb the Oklahoma City federal building, the Alfred P. Murray building. At that point of his career, he was totally burned out, and he was absolutely against doing something like that. So he turned down the offer. And at that point, instead of him being an asset for the CIA, he turned into a liability, a big risk for them. So they tried to do everything to get rid of him and stop him from speaking out. So he's been silent now for some 22 years. And now he has stepped forward with absolutely amazing information. So I'm very, very honored to be here on the show together with Cody. And I can just say that during the time that I've known him, everything he has said has been accurate, precise, and I can totally stand by his side when it comes to his sincerity and his honesty in this whole thing. So yeah, it's a great joy. And I also want the listeners to understand what he's actually doing. He is putting himself big time on the line, getting this information out there, because this is right in the belly of the beast. You cannot get more darker than this almost.
It's very brave of him. Yeah. Cody.
So let's bring him in. Cody, yeah. Cody, are you there?
Hi, Ole, and hi, Irma. This is wonderful, and I'd like to say hi to all of our brothers and sisters in the Netherlands from the United States here, and it's a wonderful opportunity. I have nothing but deep respect for Ole. He's been a researcher and a speaker in this field for so long, and our goal here is to join together with people like you, Irma, and people like Ole and the various researchers scattered around the globe to try to shine light and truth on all of this shadow government stuff that's, ruining our lives.
Yeah, really. You're very brave. I really want to thank you from out of my heart that you come forward. So if you want to tell your story, go ahead.
Okay, well, I have college degrees in mathematics and physics, and when I was in high school, I took a college entrance test, the SAT test here in America, and scored in the top 1% in the United States in physics. And so in 1975, CIA recruiter came to recruit me, and I turned down the job. I said I didn't want to work for the government. Instead, I wanted to work for myself, and I began working with some Vietnam veterans that came back from the war in Vietnam, who had also worked covertly for CIA there, and they began to train me. And over the years, I studied martial arts for 20 years and went to Japan and studied a little bit. So I learned a lot of things, and we were involved in many operations during that time. And I went to work on my Master of Science degree in physics and got to fly the Space Shuttle simulator down at NASA on a field trip there, and then began working in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as a petroleum and research geophysicist for Amoco Production Company. And that was my cover. That was my civilian cover for all the things that we were doing. And we were involved in operations in Arkansas where then Governor Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were there. And so we'll fast forward past that. We can talk about all that later if you guys like. But I want to fast forward up to 1991, and in September 18th to the 22nd of that year, I was involved in a very high-level assassination program. It was codenamed Project Slammer, and it was with the FBI Behavioral Science Division and the CIA. They were trying to figure out why our spies were defecting to the Russians. One of our station chiefs in Moscow for the CIA was Aldrich Ames, and he had defected, and they caught him and threw him in prison here. And then another FBI counterintelligence officer, Robert Hansen for the FBI, he had been caught selling secrets to the Russians, and they arrested him. And another one of our naval officers, Scott Walker, was selling the Polaris missile telemetry secrets to the Russians from our submarine. So this Project Slammer was created as a way to find out the psychological reasons why spies turn, and then develop tests to stop that. And so from this point, I want to just make a caveat that Ole and I always do on an interview like this. I quote the 1982 Intelligence Identities Protection Act, the IIPA. Here in America, we had one of our CIA case officers. His name was John Kiriakou, and he was sentenced to 30 months in prison for violating this act because he was one of the first ones to expose what was going on down in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, with the CIA's RDI program. That's the Rendition, Detention, and Interrogation Program. And he let some names slip of active officers, and they gave him 30 months in federal prison. So we don't want to name anyone that's working. We don't want to violate any of the U.S. laws. And these laws are U.S. Code Title 50, Sections 421 and 426, and they state, the disclosure of a U.S. government operative's identity is illegal only if it is done intentionally and with knowledge that the government is still actively maintaining a cover for such operation. So we're not going to name any names except maybe people that are dead or otherwise retired. So now, do you have anything you want to add, Ole?
No, I'm just really interested in hearing your story. So please go on.
Okay, so we were in 1991, and Project Slammer occurred, and I had died in that program and had to be shocked back. My heart stopped, and they restarted it, and then I died again. They restarted it, so I had to really recover for a long time, and I was about to retire anyway by that point. And then in October of 1994, I was called by another contractor, and his name is Harold Leonard. He is deceased now, so I can use his name. And he called me. We went out to a remote area, and we're always very aware about surveillance and being recorded. So we got up under the canopies and the trees, and he offered me the job. So are y'all still hearing this connection here?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're listening.
Anyway, yeah. Okay, so Harold had a purple and black backpack with $500,000 in U.S. currency. And he said, we have a job for you. And I said, well, what country are we going to? Saudi Arabia, where are we going? And he said, no, it's here in the States. And I said, well, what kind of job is it? And he said, it's an EOD job. That's an explosives and demolitions job. And I said, oh, well, what's the target? And he said, it's a building. It's a federal building. And I said, what? I said, which one? And he said, it's the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And this was 6 months before anyone ever heard about Tim McVeigh or anything. And he said, we'll give you $500,000 now and $500,000 when the job's done, and you can have your standard team, whatever you need to get it done. And I just literally blew up on him. There's no pun intended. But anyway, I told him, I said, there's no way I'm going to do that. I said, these are our own American people. I don't mind going overseas and doing some stuff with terrorists or something like that, but I will not do this. I said, you guys CIA has went too far. And there's no way I'm going to do this. So at that point, I became a trusted asset, turned from a trusted asset to a liability. And so several months went by, and then in April 19th of 1995, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building was detonated. And at that time, it killed 168 people. There were about 680 people injured. It damaged 324 buildings over a 16-block radius. It burned or destroyed 86 cars, and it shattered glass in about a little less than 260 buildings.
My goodness.
And the total damage, the total damage with the cleanup and everything was $652 million U.S. So it was a pretty big bombing. And the reasons why this was ordered, this will be discussed later, but it's quite an amazing story, and a lot of people haven't heard it. So,
Can I ask you, Cody, after you said no to this job, did you think that they were still going to go through with it? And were you expecting that it was going to happen? And if so, how did you feel when you suddenly saw it on the news?
Yeah, when I turned that job down, I told them, I said, I'd had a lot of broken bones and nerve damage. I died in the hospital. I had severe PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress disorder,
for sure,
from all the things we did. And when we got back from an operation in the States, I was drinking. I began to drink heavily to cover I was having bad dreams and waking up kicking and screaming and stuff. And my soul was being crushed.
You got a spiritual awakening, of course.
Yes, it was a spiritual awakening. When I died in the hospital in Project Slammer, I had a near-death experience and so forth, and we can talk about that later. But, so I was at the end of my rope. I'd seen too much ugliness, and I couldn't take it anymore. And if I had done this evil act, I would have lost my soul. Yeah. And so when I heard about it, I thought they were going to come kill me to shut me up because I knew about it. Mm-hmm. And right after the bombing, one of my handlers, he called me. He was his name is Duke Flaglier. He's deceased now. He was a Special Forces soldier in Vietnam and did 2 tours there. And when he got out, he accepted civilian recruitment with the CIA. And he'd been over in Europe and around, mostly in Europe, doing his operations there. But he had come back to the States at that time. And he called me and he said, Cody, you need to leave the country. And I said, what? And I said, why? I said, I'm not going to say anything. Nobody knows. And he says, you don't understand. He says, you know way, way too much. And when you turn that job down, you turn from an asset to a liability. And he says, you need to get out of the country. And I've got some keys I can get you. I have a place down in Belize in Central America. And you go stay down there right now. You stay there, and I'll come down and meet you, and then we're going to move you somewhere. And I told him, no, I'm not leaving. I'm not going to say anything. I didn't do anything. I haven't done anything illegal regarding this job. And so what I did was I had some false identities, false passports. We had disguised kits, fake driver's license, and so forth. That's called tradecraft. And so I went deep black and disappeared and showed up at some associates' houses down in Oklahoma. I had previously been a petroleum geophysicist in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which is about, 80 or 100 miles to Oklahoma City. And we had we had a network of safe houses there from our operations over in Arkansas, which were codenamed Centaur Rose, Jade Bridge, and Screwworm. And they dealt with arming the Nicaraguans down there in the regional conflict that was occurring at the time between the Sandinistas with Daniel Ortega as president. He was the communist leader, communist president there. I had some friends that, had dinner with him at his house. And then the U.S. was supporting the Contras against them. So we were involved in all that. But if you fast forward now, we are in April 19th, 1995. The Murrah building had just been bombed. I'd been warned by my CI handler to leave the country. Instead of leaving the country, I went black. I went covert and went to safe houses and stayed a while. And then I did leave in the U.S. for a little bit, and then I came back. And so meanwhile, Tim McVeigh and Terry Nichols, they were both Desert Storm soldiers in the 1991 Desert Storm conflict in Iraq. Yeah. And so they had done the Ryder truck and so forth. They ended up being patsies. What they really were patsies, unknowingly, of course. And then they had been charged with that bombing, and they'd been arrested. And so some years went by, and they were waiting and preparing for the trial. And I had come back to Colorado Springs, Colorado. I had previously been one of the biggest gun dealers in Colorado. That was a civilian front. We were the biggest machine gun, silencer, sawed-off shotgun dealers in the state. And here in America, Irma and Ole in Spain, their laws are different, and in the Netherlands, their laws are different. But here in America, if you get a federal license, it's called an NFA license, National Firearm Act, you can legally buy and sell machine guns and silencers and stuff with all the proper stuff. So after that bombing, years went by, and in 1997, that's just 2 years later, after the Murrah building was bombed, Timothy McVeigh and Nichols were waiting trial. The ATF and the DEA, that's the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Drug Enforcement Administration, conducted a joint operation called Operation Stingray. And during the course of that operation, I met one of their undercover agents. His name was Blake L. Butler, and he was later to be awarded the nation's top cop. That's an award here in America federally, where all the tens of thousands of federal agents, he was awarded that by Vice President Al Gore and United States Attorney General Janet Reno. So this was pretty high-level stuff. But I met him, and then one day, in April 20th of 1999, they had a massive high school shooting in Denver, Colorado, in a suburb called Littleton, Colorado. And there was a bunch of children killed, and it was a very horrible thing. It was all over the news. And on April 22nd, 2 days later, I was with undercover agent Blake Butler, and President Bill Clinton and Janet Reno were all over the TV. And he asked me, what do you think about them? So I thought we were all alone. I did not know that they had hidden 4mm cameras in there. And I started talking about Bill Clinton and the pedophile rings and the drug rings and sex rings with Hillary Clinton down in Arkansas during Operation Centaur Rose. And I talked about Janet Reno, because one of my friends from Vietnam, Captain Glenn Wilson, he had worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency after he got back from Vietnam. And he also worked as head of the No-Knock Narcotics Police down in Dade County, Florida, where Janet Reno was previous to her appointment by Bill Clinton as U.S. Attorney General. So this is a lot of political stuff, okay, and I'm getting to the main thing. But so I talked about all these ops and CI and stuff, and so 5 months later, September 16th, 1999, Blake Butler planted me with false evidence. The CIA took the tapes and disappeared them because they didn't want anyone knowing about this stuff. So they planted me with false evidence. Yeah. So they threw me in prison, and the judge that they put me in front of in the 10th Circuit Federal Courts was a man named Judge Edward Nottingham. And it turns out, Irma and Ole, he was appointed by none other than the ex-director of Central Intelligence, George Bush Sr., back in the 1970s. Then the prosecutor was Tom Strickland, and he was directly appointed by President Bill Clinton. And Tom Strickland had worked in a law firm with Brownstein, Hyatt, and Faber, and Norman Brownstein, the principal of that law firm, had worked with the Council of Six in the CIA. They were a group of 6 attorneys back in the 70s under George Bush. So the fix was in on this case, Irma. You know, the courts were being stacked. The judges was appointed by the CIA. Everything was controlled.
Everything.
And so when pardon me?
Everything, as we presume, but you are confirming this. So mind blowing.
Yeah, we have in this book. It's 362-sided pages. We have all the information. We have documents, court records. We have ATF surveillance tapes. We have counter surveillance tapes. I have over 20,000 pages of documentation. But we put we have a lot of this documented. Some of the Black Ops stuff cannot be documented because there's no records, of course. But the stuff that can be, we have a large volume of evidence to substantiate what I'm saying here. Mm-hmm. So to make a long story short, they planted me with evidence. There was another operative in this op. His name was Kerry James Gagan, and he was given C4 plastic explosives to go down to Trinidad, Colorado. He met 3 Middle Eastern men. They had plans to bomb them. They had plans of the Murrah building. And he came back. He thought he was going to be a patsy like McVeigh. He got spooked. He went to the Secret Service office in Denver and told them about it. The CIA found out about it. Then they planted his house with evidence, and they threw him in there with me and Timothy McVeigh. So they planted 2 of us that had operational knowledge of this thing, and then they pinned the bombing on McVeigh. So there was a massive cover-up in the court system, and I can go more and talk about all this if you want, but if you want to, if you don't have any questions, we can start talking about the real reasons why.
Yeah, because that's really my biggest question. Why? Indeed, of course, there must be a reason. So if you know about that, please tell us.
Yes, we have to go back just a little bit in history, and I have to lay some background so the people in Netherlands will understand. They may not know some of the stuff that America was doing.
Go ahead.
But back in the 80s, Saddam Hussein was in Iraq. Mm-hmm. He had come to power, and they began a war with Iran. And Iran enjoyed a 10-to-1 infantry soldier advantage over Iraq. Saddam Hussein was a paid asset for the Central Intelligence Agency. He was working for us, and he was more or less our ally.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, go on.
And so that's why Donald Rumsfeld, who was the Secretary of Defense here in the United States at the time, he flew over to Baghdad and met him. We were providing Saddam with satellite intelligence, and also we were covertly arming him. And one of the things we gave him was a weaponized strain of anthrax. It's called the Ames strain of anthrax. It was made at Fort Detrick, Maryland. It has a small spore size and a altered protein coat so that it's weaponized. It will infect people easier. And we gave him that to overcome. In case Iran invaded, they were going to use that stuff. And so what happened was Saddam Hussein finished the war with Iran, and he still kept all of these biological agents. And then he invaded Kuwait. And the Saudis were afraid he would come into their country, so they put pressure on George Bush and our government over here. And so George Bush and them decided to invade Kuwait and liberate it and kick Saddam out. And now Saddam was just like me. He had changed from an asset to a liability. And so they had to demonize him. And then we were worried, since we had covertly given these biological anthrax agents to him and they didn't tell the American people, they were afraid that if we sent our troops over there, that they would use them on us. So the standard vaccine was a 6-month course, 1 shot per month to build immunity. And they didn't have time. they had to go over to Kuwait. They couldn't wait 6 months. So what they did was create a new anthrax vaccine, and they used an adjunct called squalene. It was never before used. It's basically shark oil, similar to the adjuncts or autoimmune boosters that they use in flu shots. You know, the Therasol that had the mercury in it and the aluminum-based adjuncts. All this stuff makes people sick. And so they bypassed FDA testing. Here in America, they have a thing in the federal government's Food and Drug Administration, that's FDA. And under law, when you come up with a new vaccine, you're required to test it. Well, they bypassed all that, and they got the anthrax shot down to 1 month with one shot to hurry it up and rush it through. And so they gave that to all of our guys over here. The British also were sold that same vaccine because their troops were going over there. And a lot of them got sick. A lot of our guys got sick. It was made by a company called Bioport here in the States. And so Desert Storm lasted, and everyone was getting sick. Now I'm getting to the Murrah building here, the reason why. All right, that's the background. They also used depleted uranium weapons over there in that war. That's the first time America had used depleted uranium-238. It was in the bullets they shot out of the A-10 Warthog airplanes and the tanks that we used, okay? And these weapons were high velocity and slightly radioactive, and when they hit the targets, they made fireballs in the sky. And in the heat of those fireballs, brand new elements, compounds were created, like uranium dioxide. And the particulate size of these compounds were approximately 4 microns. Now, the MOP gear, the gas mask, and the biological, nuclear, and chemical gear that's standard issue to U.S. and British troops, they go down to about 10 microns. So these new particles of low-level radioactivity were being breathed in. And when the troops breathe them in, they concentrate in the human body in 2 basic places. One of them is the thyroid glands in the throat, and then in the ovaries for a woman and the testicles for a man. And so what was happening over a period of time was our troops were, and there was 28 nations in the coalition, you know, in that war. But the American and British troops, they were breathing this stuff and didn't know it because it had never been used before. And so years later, when they got back to their respective countries, they began getting sick. And when the soldiers got home, they, made love to their wives, and they were transmitting low-level radiation in their semen, and it was going into their wives. Then their wives would have children. Then the radiation would be transferred to the child, and then down to the grandchildren, and so forth. And so what we were seeing here, Irma, is a big multi-generational thing. And so a few years after the war, in about 1994, just before the Murrah building was bombed, there was a senator here in the United States. All of our Gulf War guys were getting sick. There's approximately 480,000 troops. And they called it failure to thrive syndrome. The children were being born, and they had all these problems, autoimmune disorders. Our soldiers were sick. The VA hospitals, the Veterans Administration hospitals were filling up. And so they started hearings to determine how much money to give our soldiers as payment. And Senator Chris Shays, he was a Republican in Connecticut, and they had hearings. He ordered the FBI to go around and collect all the medical records. Okay?
But it is done on purpose. Does it something to do with depopulation? What's this about? What did they try to reach?
Well, let me just finish this one little thing, and then we'll get to that. They were having hearings scheduled, and this could turn into hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of medical costs, all the way down from son to grandson. They did not know how many generations this radiation would be genetically transferred. And so they went to collect all the records, and guess where the records were stored?
Well, tell me.
The Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building.
Uh-huh.
So when the records were blown up and destroyed, the Pentagon and the government were off the hook for hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of future medical costs.
Wow.
This is a cover-up of immense proportions. And so later on, after the Murrah Building was bombed in April 19th, 1995, then in September the 19th of 1996, we had congressional hearings on the Gulf War syndrome, and the Department of Defense at those hearings admitted that over 400,000 Gulf War syndrome medical records had, quote, disappeared. So this was a massive cover-up, not only of the defective mop gear, the big gas mask and stuff. It was a cover-up of the anthrax vaccines. It was a cover-up of the depleted uranium weapons. And it's not only our troops over here, Irma and Ole, and the British troops that were in this that got sick, and all the other countries. One of the biggest things that ate me up and hurt me terribly was to see the results of it. In the Tigris and Euphrates rivers there in Iraq, they use that water to irrigate dates. And Iraq is one of the biggest exporters of dates in the area. I think they have like 26 different kinds of dates. But the point is all this radiation and particulates were being stirred up in the sandstorms, and they were being transferred. They've gotten a water supply, and they got into date crops. And the United Nations went to Iraq about 10 years after the war. This was just in 2001, before the 9/11 Twin Towers were blown up. And they found that the leukemia-type sicknesses in the children in Iraq went up 600%. So not only were the troops being poisoned by these depleted uranium weapons, which had never been used before, but all the mass suffering of the Iraqi people, and especially the children. So this was a massive cover-up.
But can I ask you, why on earth would anyone use depleted uranium in weapons ammunition? I don't get it.
No.
Okay. Irma, did you have a question?
No, I have the same question because I can't understand it at all.
Okay, well, they had begun testing depleted uranium at, I believe it was Dugway Proving Grounds earlier, and then in 1991, they decided to use it. And I know pilots here that flew the A-10 Warthog. They were called our tank busters. And Saddam Hussein had thousands of the Soviet T-54 tanks. And these depleted uranium weapons were found to be very effective at penetrating armor. They had a high sectional density. They were very heavy. It's a very heavy element. And in our M1A1 Abrams tanks in America, the standard battle tank, they shoot sabot rounds, they call them, out of the barrel. And these rounds have about an 8 or 9 inch tube of depleted uranium on the inside of them. And so they come out of the barrel at approximately 5,200 feet per second. I'm using our English system we use in America. I don't know the kilogram and stuff for your countries, but it's 5,200 feet per second. It's very high kinetic energy. When they go through the barrel, they actually catch on fire. So you're sending a fiery, very dense, slightly radioactive projectile, and it had enough energy to take a Soviet T-54 tank. The turrets weigh about 11 tons, and it would hit it and blow the turret up like a tumbleweed up in the air. So these weapons, the reason they were used is because they are extremely effective at penetrating armor and taking out tanks and forward artillery units with the big guns and big cannons.
But Cody, did they? I believe that the depleted uranium has been used in tanks as well, the U.S. tanks. Is that correct?
Okay, your signal was breaking up, and I couldn't understand what did repeat, please.
Okay, the question was. I've heard also that this depleted uranium has been built in the American tank as well, sort of protective shield type of parts on the tanks, thus also exposing the souls inside for this horrific radiation.
Yes, and the problem, plutonium-239, for instance, or uranium-235, that's the weapons-grade form of uranium that's used in the fission atomic weapons. That's highly radioactive. I mean, you hold it and get close to it, and you'll be dead pretty soon. But the uranium-238, it came from the spent fuel rods, okay, from nuclear power plants. And France over there, I think about 85% of France's power is made from nuclear reactors. Here in America, we have about 104 nuclear reactors. And so as they make their energy, they have spent fuel rods, and that's uranium-238. So this was also a way for the Pentagon to take our nuclear waste out of our country, use it in weapons, and then get rid of it in another country. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like nuclear dumping. No one wants to dump it around here, so they just put it in weapons and go dump it in Iraq. And the Iraqi people have been suffering horribly. So this is a big picture.
Yeah.
And the reason why the Murrah building was bombed, that's one of the reasons. There's another reason, which has to do with the destruction of records. And that it was a cover-up for Bill and Hillary Clinton over in Arkansas. They'd been conducting covert operations with the CIA, providing cover for them. And there was a bunch of records of law enforcement that had occurred over the years. People were snooping around and getting wind that something big was happening. And those records were transferred from the Little Rock, Arkansas FBI office over to the Murrah building shortly before it was blown up. And one of the Tulsa police detectives, where I worked in Tulsa, his name is Craig Roberts, and an FBI agent from Little Rock, Arkansas, under the condition of anonymity, called him and told him, so, hey, they just moved all these records on the Clintons over there to the Murrah building. Then it blew up. So the law enforcement records necessary to impeach or prosecute the Clintons were also destroyed. And the Whitewater investigation with the Clintons began here in this country in July 26th of 1994, and then a few months later, the Murrah building blows up. So it's a high-level cover-up.
Yeah. But, yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, and also one thing that I think is really important is that once the first bombs had gone off, people were coming, trying to rescue wounded and injured people in all the wreckage after the building. Suddenly, they started screaming out there, secondary bombs have been found. Please get out of the area. You have to leave. You have to leave. So everybody was leaving, also leaving behind all of these poor victims that were there crying for help and so on. And then when the whole area was cleared, in came some vans. People in blue uniforms, overalls, jumped out of these vans, went straight into this wreckage of a building, and they knew exactly what they were looking for, went in and came out with big file cabinets with documents and papers, all connected to the Clintons. Then got it into the vans, left the area, and then people were allowed back in to try and rescue the survivors. I mean, it really stinks,
Yeah, it was a massive cover-up, and they knew that building, when it blew up, was going to, of course, be all over the news. I mean, if you're going to conduct a covert operation to destroy records in a building by destroying the building, then you're going to have a cover-up for it. You're going to have a patchy.
Yeah.
A reason. Yeah. And so what they told the American people here was, that Tim McVeigh and Terry Nichols, they were the lone bombers, and they drove a Ryder truck full of ammonium nitrate and diesel in front of the Murrah building at about 9:03 a.m., April 19th, 95, and they detonated and destroyed the building. That was the cover for the explosives and stuff that had already been planted in there. And as Ole said, 2 of the bombs didn't go off. So now they had a big major blowback problem. They had to cover up all this stuff. And so this all turned into a big fiasco, and it was a mess. And a lot of people had to be murdered that were witnesses that saw all of it. One of them was Randy Yeeke. He was an Oklahoma City police officer who was giving a traffic ticket down on Northwest 5th Street in downtown Oklahoma City at the time the Murrah building blew up. And he went running. He'd been an MP in the military. He went running down to rescue people, and he rescued 4 people who had been cut severely by the glass and were bleeding profusely. And he won the Oklahoma City Police Department's award for valor, meritorious conduct for saving people's lives. Then he went to the daycare center to rescue children, and he found an unexploded bomb there. So he began his own investigation, and they tried to hush him up. The Oklahoma City Police Department put a lot of pressure on him because the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, had caught some of the Oklahoma City police officers dealing drugs. And so they told him, if you'll help us cover this investigation up, we won't blow the whistle on the drug dealing. Mm-hmm. And so there was corruption. There's massive layers of corruption here. And then later, Randy Yeeke collected 9 boxes of files, and he got afraid for his life. He was found murdered later, to make a long story short. He was found murdered, shot in the head. His partner had made copies of the files. Dr. Don Chumley was his name. Mm-hmm. And they all got afraid, and Chumley put the records in a private plane. It was a single-engine plane, and he was flying out to hide them somewhere, and his plane crashed. Oh, yeah, and then Tanya Yeeke, who was Randy's wife, they had put a copy of the records down at a bank building in a safe deposit box. When she found out that his friend, Dr. Chumley, the plane crashed, and her husband, Randy Yeeke, had been found shot, and he was cut up, he was tortured, she went down to get the records, scared to death. And when she got there to the bank to get them, they told her that the FBI had just been there and confiscated the records under national security. So this is how they covered up all the witnesses and the people. In the book, there's a whole chapter naming there were dozens and dozens of people outright murdered just to shut them up. Mm-hmm. And so this was a example of a false flag event that occurred domestically here in the United States. But Irma, the reason we're Ole and I are investigating these things, this is a pattern. See, like that Sheffield bombing in England, and some of those terrorist bombings in the Middle East, and Ole knows a lot more about all this than me. But these same patterns occur throughout any country, and a lot of times the same shadow government operators just pick up and move from one country to the next, and we're trying to shine light on it so that the civilian population will understand that a lot of these bombings are not what the news and the media propaganda say. They're actually shadow government covert operations.
For sure, we know. And a lot of people knows too, so that's the positive part of it. But this is mind-blowing information. And what did make you to come forward? Because you are in danger, I guess. Still, you are in danger.
Yes. Well, when I was a black operator, mm-hmm. My base pay was about $20,000 a month U.S. We had some jobs for bodyguarding, like over in Saudi Arabia, the royal family. Mm-hmm. Where we had one job offered over there for $50,000 U.S. a month. for 6-month lock-ins, and I did it for the money because I was greedy and I wanted money, and I was making a lot more money than I ever could as a geophysicist at Amoco in the oil business. Yeah. But later on, when I had my near-death experience in Project Slammer, I had a near-death experience. I died in the hospital, and I floated over myself and saw my body, and at that point, when I came back, I was in a wheelchair for a long time, and I had to recover. But at that point, Irma and Ole, I saw the truth that we are really spiritual beings of light.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about religions.
No.
I really saw this, and my spirit was out of my body, and then it was a whole revelation to me that there's something bigger and deeper than money and power and fame. And when I recovered from that, I had a complete change of heart, and I decided to do the light and to help people instead of hurt them. And I made it my mission that if I ever made it out of all this Oklahoma City nightmare, that I would one day speak truth to power and be an example that we can walk in this world without fear. Because so many people, Irma, and there's probably guys in the Netherlands and in Spain where Ole is, and different countries that have conducted operations, and they're carrying these secrets around in their hearts, and we're asking them to stand up now to get the truth out so that we can stop all this evil.
Yeah, for sure. And it's you are talking about inner knowledge, higher inner knowledge, and you woke up, and it's very, very important that people like you are trying to wake up other people, because the only thing we can manage and save this world is from below, from out of the people. So it's very important you are doing this, and I really love you because of that. You talked about a book. Can we order the book? Is it published?
We have 3 different publishers right now that are looking at that. I could not do this the way normal people do, Irma. In other words, if someone writes a book, they normally go to a publisher, and then they get it out in the open, and then they do the interviews. If I had taken a book like this and tried to go to a publisher, the CIA would have found out about it and shut it down. So what we're doing with Ole's help and other people here in America is we're getting the interviews and stuff out first, and then what we have with this book right now is CD edit copies, and we have a number of them if people want to get some. We spread them out all over. I have dead man switches, so to speak. We have copies of all the tapes, all the evidence, the book, everything. It's in multiple countries. In case anything happens to me, this stuff will be out no matter what. What we can do, we do have a CD edit copy, and if people want to order that, they can contact me right now through my email address. But our computers were just hacked last week. We had a bad virus. We were fixing to do an interview with Ole, and then the computer completely shut down, and it's been ruined, so we've got new ones coming. But the shadow government was trying to shut this thing down, so we do have some copies of this if people are interested.
Okay. We can arrange that in the video afterwards, so we would like to have this information. Ole, are you still there?
I am indeed. Could I ask you a question, Cody? It's like you say that you did this for money, and that greed is such a big part in this dark world of operations and so on. At the same time, as Black Op, you would need to have a very low profile where you could not use this money. So I don't get it really. What is the point of having loads and loads of money if you can't use it? Do you save it for a rainy day when you get retired, or what is it all about?
No, well, your premise is not correct. The question's not correct. You can use the money. A lot of times we would be paid in one country Like in South Africa, we got paid in Cougarans, and down in South America, we got paid in cocaine, and over in Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh City, we got paid in Soviet arms. Sometimes we were paid in dollars or diamonds, anything of value. But if you do an op in one country and you get the money there, that doesn't mean you can't go to another country and spend it. All you have to do is change your identity and find a way to transfer the wealth in some way. And there's a lot of ways that you can wash money through the banks. And so your premise is if you make a bunch of money, you can't spend it. That's not true. You can make it and you can spend it, but you just have to be very, very careful on how you launder the money and how you wash the money so there's no ties back to the original covert and black operations that you were conducting.
Mm-hmm.
So were you living a life of luxury but sort of undercover?
Yeah, I mean, I had Cadillac limousines and Mercedeses and fancy cars and all kinds of stuff, but we had to keep it all hidden and keep it in not my name, and we had to change identities. And so, yeah, I had a lifestyle like that, and it was amazing. My girlfriend here that's with me right now, she had dinner with Pablo Escobar down there in the big drug lord, the Colombian drug lord. She used to work for them, that cartel, and she survived barely. But, we operated at a real high level, and some of the operations were domestic, like the Murrah building here in America. Some of them are overseas. Some of them I'm not going to talk about, period. They're not the subject of this thing, and a lot of the guys that were there are dead. So we did make a lot of money at certain points, but we had to be careful in which country where we put it, how we deposited it, and how we washed it through banks, and what we did. But I was a fairly low-level player. I was just an asset. Some of the other case officers and people in CIA, they would be conducting a sanctioned CIA op in a country, and they would be doing whatever that op required, but on the side, they do business on the side, see? And so they were salting away things for themselves privately, and this is quite common. The KGB agents do it. The Israeli Mossad agents, MI6, British intelligence, everyone makes a little money on the side, okay?
Yeah, but for you, it's already knowledge. But for people who are listening, it's mind blowing and mind boggling because they won't believe it.
Normal. Well, I don't care what they believe. I'm just speaking the truth.
I know.
In a black op, you make sure there's no records, no photographic intelligence, no SIGINT, we call it, signal intelligence. There's no witnesses, no fingerprints. That's a black op. A black op is something that occurs and nobody knows about it except the people that conducted it. So
sure.
we were real good at that. And the CIA and KGB, they call it sanitizing. When you conduct an operation, then you clean up around it so that there's no telltale traces. And this is what the game is. That's what you do, and you get paid by your principals, for conducting them. One of the bodyguard ops we were offered was in Saudi Arabia, $50,000 a month, and our job was to bodyguard some of the royal families and sheiks' nephews and children and stuff, because they were always constantly worried in the Middle East about them getting kidnapped and being held for ransom. Mm-hmm. And so $50,000 wasn't near enough money for me to go take that job. I turned it down because you can get killed very, very easily in those things. And the money, what we do is a risk assessment and a threat assessment. Mm-hmm. When you're offered some kind of job, you have to look at how much money and what area it's in and how much risk is going to be involved. You could pay me $20 million on some jobs, and the risk is just simply too high. I mean, what good is money if you're a dead man?
Yeah, nothing. I'm not sure if Ole has a question left for this moment.
No.
Your connection is very poor, Ole.
Yeah, I know, so I don't have a question.
Shall we close off for now and perhaps talk later another time, because I'm really sure there will be some more questions afterwards. And I really would like to know more about the book, because we can try to bring that forward also.
Yeah, the name of this book is Choosing the Light.
Choosing the Light, okay.
Choosing the Light, Dark Secrets of the Oklahoma City Bombing. Yeah, my email address to contact to get an edit copy. My email address is Cody Golden Elk, E-L-K.
E-L-K, okay.
At yahoo.com.
Yahoo.com.
And that's my Indian name. I'm part Cherokee Indian and part white. So Cody Golden Elk's my Indian name. And if anyone emails me there, we can arrange to get a CD copy to them somehow. International shipping, though, will be a little bit more, so we'll work all that out. But I just wanted to thank you and thank Ole for this opportunity to expose some of this stuff. We're doing it in the highest and best intention to awake people up to some of the things that are going on in the shadows. We're trying to shine some light on some of these covert activities, and the world is not the way we're told. I don't know how the media is in Netherlands, Irma, but over here in America, there's a lot of propaganda.
Yeah.
And the people are good people, a lot of them, but they're being lied to terribly by their government.
It's the same here. That's why I'm working for 10 years now, day and night, to get the real truth out. So it's horrible here also, unfortunately.
Yeah, and we live under a lot of fear here too, because our government, the American government's one of the most powerful in the world. And for me to talk like this and do these things, they can just come up and plant you with evidence, or they have a lot of ways to shut you up. And so
sure.
I hope that we can get this out, and I hope everything goes good for me. But we'll just have to see, what happens. I can't let my mind be crippled by fear. My love, my fear is only outweighed by my love of freedom. Because what kind of world are we going to hand our children if they're conducting bombings and all of this stuff going on, these cover-ups? I mean, our world will turn into a slave state.
For sure.
There's a prayer that is from my nation of people, my ancestors, the Cherokee Indians, and they were horribly abused by the federal government here. But we have a prayer here that's it's the old Indian language, and I'll speak it in Cherokee and then tell the English translation. So this prayer goes like this. Adawihi anihi niha dohi u a luni olohi aliga lo luhi unata gali iliga osata duf. And in English, that translates to wise protectors, they are giving. Serenity, it resounds. Mother Earth and Father Sky are giving. I am thankful. It is well. And I'd like to say one more thing at the end of this book. We have, it's a quote, Irma, that I'd like to, for everyone out there who knows about covert ops and stuff, to provide us as much information as you can. But it says, fear of death is a strong enforcer of silence. But guilt, like heart disease, can be a silent killer for the guilty.
That's the real truth. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I had to, when they bombed the Murrah building, and I knew I turned it down, I was afraid they were going to kill me. I'm very lucky be alive here to talk like this, but I believe it's the grace of higher spiritual forces that I stayed alive. I died twice in the hospital. I feel like this is my mission, and I feel like Ole and you, Irma, and the other truth seekers, that we're all now part of a bigger plan. Yes,
for sure.
And we're all drawn together now in this. My life is not as important. The Murrah building is not as important. All these, what is important is that we all rise together in the light of truth, and we try to understand these crazy events in our world and who's pulling the strings and who's ruining our lives, no matter what country you're in. These things are happening all around the world.
Yeah, it's you are completely right. It's absolutely truth. We need to know the truth. We need to know who we are. We need to know we are spiritual and multidimensional beings. And yeah, I can't thank you enough for this moment, Cody. It's really amazing.
We thank you, and I send my thanks to my people, the Cherokee, and to all the warriors. You know, the soldiers, the good soldiers. I'm not talking about the bad ones. There are some very good soldiers and very good people in governments that really, around the world, that really try to help the people. But there's also a group of very evil ones that conduct these sinister bombings and assassinations. And Ole knows a lot more about that stuff around the world than me. So it's there, and it's real, and it's time that we expose it and step into the light. It's going to be hard, though.
Ole, do you want to say something?
I just wanted to say that I think it's wonderful for us to come together like this, and I feel very inspired by courage like Cody is showing us. And I really hope that the intention behind all this, that is very clear to the listener and viewers. We're here to lift the world, transcend this in a totally nonviolent but absolute fearless exposure of these dark forces. And the thing is that they are so weak, they can only function in the dark. So if we aim the light of truth at them, they just stop. They cannot function because it's only like, it's called black ops, covert operations. It's just because they're like cockroaches in the dark. You switch on the light and they cannot keep on functioning. So that is our task, and keep the intention pure and clean, without hatred, without anger if possible, and just stop it. You know, enough is enough.
Turn on the light.
Turn on the light. And I love that Cody has chosen that title for the book, Using the Light. And my website is Light on Conspiracies. It's all about light, even though we discuss all of these horrific events.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so Irma, you know, light is light, and darkness is merely the absence of it.
For sure. And we can make it disappear by turning on the light. So let's go through this and let's make a better world, please, together.
Yeah, and Irma, if you want to translate that into your language or any other languages, you have my permission to do so. I have not signed any deals yet with the publishers. My idea is to try to get truth out, and if you provide me an address on my email, I will mail you one. I mailed Ole one. He's had a copy for a long time.
Yeah.
And, so you're welcome to do that. If I sign a publishing deal here in America, then they're going to restrict me from doing this. But another problem is the CIA has a lot of front companies in the publishing business. And if I sign a movie deal or a book publishing deal, a lot of times they'll give you a big check and they buy the rights to the material, also they can bury it and suppress it.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, that's what's happening all the time. So
that's not what I want. My concern is truth and light over money. I'm like anyone else. I like money and I need money. Yeah. Ole spent a lot of time and money over the years. We all need some money, but there's a difference between having money to live on and being greedy.
For sure. A big difference.
If anything happens to me, or I have a strange car accident or something, then this book is out.
Yeah, we know, but we do not hope so. Please, you are on a mission, and we have some protection. I'm sure of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you very much, the both of you.
And thank you.
My absolute pleasure as well.
Yeah. I'm sure we talk again. We talk again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds good, because we have a whole lot more information. We just scratched it's the tip of the iceberg we covered today.